Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where we look at another member of my classic computer collection. And today we're going to have a look at the Commodore Amiga 500. Now the Amigas were a family of computers that were brought out in the mid to late 1980s. They were quite exceptional. They had a fantastic chipset for multimedia, for sound and for graphics. And the model that we're going to have a look at today, the Amiga 500, found a real market in the home, particularly here in New Zealand and in other parts of the world as well. So let's have a look at it. The Amiga story starts in 1982 with a man called Jay Miner, seen here in this 1990 photo. Jay had worked for Atari for a number of years and had been the principal designer for the Atari 800 chipset. In 1982, somewhat disillusioned about Atari's management, Jay and a number of his colleagues split from Atari to form a company which would eventually become known as Amiga Corporation. The story of how Amiga came to be owned by Commodore is one of much irony and intrigue, and it's worth telling, so here it is in a nutshell. The year was 1982, and the group that was to become Amiga Corporation had broken away from Atari to go it alone. Initially they were financed by a group of dentists out of Florida. However, being at the cutting edge of R&D is difficult, and in 1983 Amiga Corporation started to run low on funds. Funds were eventually found, ironically, from their old employers, Atari. Atari advanced the group $500,000. What they got for this was a one-year exclusive use of the chipset design Amiga was working on. The deadline for delivery of this design was June 30th, 1984. Meanwhile, elsewhere in computerland, Jack Tramiel, who from scratch had built up Commodore to a very successful company, left in January 1984 after an acrimonious dust-up with the board of directors. Jack forms a holding company, Tramiel Technology, while he decides where to go next. In the meantime, he also starts work on a new home computer with a 32-bit processor, with the help of some engineers which had left Commodore with him. Back to Atari. In 1984 they were hurting. They were big into game cartridges, and the great video game crash of 1983 had hurt them badly. Going into 1984 they were losing stacks of money every day, and parent company Warner was desperate to sell the company. Jack sees Atari, the company he was in direct competition with when he was at Commodore, as a possible purchase, so starts negotiations with Warner. Meanwhile, Amiga Corporation is again running short of funds. Jack Tramiel visits Amiga and scopes it out for a possible purchase. He likes the chipset, but he doesn't want most of the staff. The folks at Amiga, therefore, don't want to have anything to do with Jack Tramiel, so when they get wind of this likely purchase of Atari, and knowing about the contract, they get alarmed. They know that they have this agreement with Atari, and that if they don't deliver the chipset, and of course being squeezed for funds they couldn't, then the agreement said that Amiga Corporation would be forfeit to Atari. Hence they would have Jack as a boss, but only for a short time, as their employment was likely to be terminated forthwith. They looked to Commodore then, Jack Tramiel's old company and now arch enemy, for some quick funding to keep the Tramiel wolf from the door. Commodore goes one better though. Rather than an injection of cash, they buy the company outright. So the Amiga staff are saved. But hang on a minute, what about the contract with Atari? Well, while Jack is in final negotiations to buy Atari, Commodore returns the $500,000 to Atari, repaying their initial investment and essentially, at least in Commodore's mind, nullifying the contract. The Amiga chipset was now safe with Commodore. So, in July 1984, Jack Tramiel buys Atari from Warner. Commodore is worried as Jack seems to have a new home computer nearly finished. In fact, Commodore reckoned that he couldn't have designed this computer so quickly without stealing Commodore's technology, enmeshed in the Commodore engineers he took with him, so they file a lawsuit to stop Jack's new machine being released. Now, sometime in late July, the men working for Jack discover this Atari Amiga contract. It seemed to them that some underhand skullduggery had been afoot, and Jack Tramiel used it as an excuse to slap a counter-lawsuit on Commodore, essentially for stealing Atari IP, by Commodore claiming, when they paid back the money to Atari, that the Amiga chipsets were useless, when clearly they were not, as an impressive prototype was shown at a trade show just a few months before. In the end, the lawsuits didn't stop either of the machines, although the uncertainty did delay the Amiga's development for a few months. The Atari ST was announced in January 1985, as started to roll off the production line in June. The Amiga was announced in July of that year and started shipping in September. Eventually, both lawsuits were settled out of court in a closed decision in 1987. So the twist is, the Amiga was almost acquired by Jack Tramiel, but through dubious means was acquired by his bitter rival, which was the very company he founded, Commodore. They should make a movie out of it. Although the first Amiga, the machine which came to be called the Amiga 1000, was first announced in July 1985, it didn't really appear here in New Zealand until mid-1986. Here it appears on the cover of the June 1986 issue of New Zealand Bits and Bytes. Realizing that the Amiga could be used in both ends of the personal computer market, but didn't really fit well into either, Commodore decided to release two new models, a high-end hard disk-based machine called the Amiga 2000 and a low-end home computer called the Amiga 500. The Amiga 500 had an external power supply unit and didn't have the same expansion slots as an Amiga 2000 or a hard disk. It used instead a single built-in double-density double-sided 880 kilobyte 3.5-inch floppy drive with the option to use other external ones. The model was sold in home appliance chain stores, same kind of shops that were selling Commodore 64s. It was cheap and provided a lot of computer power for the price. The Amiga 500 and the Atari ST 520 released earlier essentially saw the end of 8-bit computing for the home. So here's my Amiga 500. This is an early photo before I got a proper RGB screen for it. I've now got a dedicated Commodore one, as you'll see in a moment. And I bought the screen specifically because I knew I would need to do this video at some stage, and I didn't want the Amiga 500 to appear half-dressed. But boy, what a difference that screen makes. I wish I'd bought one earlier. The machine can do composite video, but only in grayscale. Actually, it's very crisp, but to use color composite video, or plug it into a television through the aerial socket, you need this adapter. With the new screen I've now got, it's largely surplus to requirements. Let's go for a quick tour around the machine. The Amiga is similar in shape to the Commodore 128, which in turn was close to the newer design of the Commodore 64, which was released around that time. I've never warmed to this wedge design. I'm sure others will disagree, but I find it kind of unattractive and almost cheap looking. Note the numeric keypad. From a design perspective, it's interesting that from the mid-1980s up to, say, the early 1990s, the numeric keypad was a feature and was considered desirable. It was a standard fixture in the IBM PC and clones world, of course, and hence it gave the computer a certain business street cred if they had them, even though it's unlikely that most owners in the home market ever use the numeric keypad enough to justify it being there, taking up room. Sneaking around the back, here's what we see. Lots and lots of ports for connecting all sorts of things. So starting from the left and going to the right, we have 2 ports for plugging in joysticks or a mouse, left and right stereo audio RCA sockets, an external disk drive connector, a serial RS-232 port, a parallel printer port, a socket for the power supply, a socket for an RGB monitor, and a mono composite video plug. This unit has the memory expanded from 512K to 1 megabyte by what's known as trapdoor RAM. And this is achieved by a small board plugged into a recess accessible at the bottom of the case. Around the side is a switch labelled fast RAM or chip RAM, depending on what part of the bus you want to allocate this extra RAM to. That cover you can see containing the switch also hides a Zorro to expansion bus, that can be used to plug in other peripherals. Here's a shot looking down at the motherboard. The trapdoor RAM has been removed, but you can see the space for it, and the connector pins there on the lower right. The Amiga 500 uses practically the same chipset as the original Amiga 1000. There's a Motorola 6800 microprocessor running at about 7.1 MHz. CPU is 32-bit, but it uses a 16-bit data bus and a 24-bit address bus. You can see the single floppy disk drive lying there on the top right in its case. Here's a shot with the drive removed. Here's the serial number. Those dates, 8990, might refer to when this particular unit was made. So, onto a flyby of my most recent configuration. You can see the main unit there, which is looking just fine. There's a little bit of yellowing towards the front and particularly towards the left, but it's not severe. These are the so-called tank mouse, usually connected to these Amigas. You see the floppy disk drive there. A Commodore monitor, looking nice and crisp and sharp. We'll have a look at the operating system a little later. You can see I've got a few things plugged into this machine, including an RS-232 cable going to my PC, which I'll talk about in just a moment, onto the external floppy disk drive. It's a genuine Amiga one, as you can see by that tick. Now back to the RS-232, and the Amiga is connected to my PC, and I'm running a piece of software called Amiga Explorer, and that lets me write real Amiga disks from disk images that I get off the internet. There's the power supply, and it's got an on-off switch on it. In fact, it's the only way you can switch the computer on and off. So there you have it, the usual clutter that you get with a 1980s home computer. Okay, time to fire the beast up, and I'll show you some shots of the operating system, Amiga DOS, or Workbench version 1.3, which is this particular one, and this is the most common one that came with Amiga 500s when they first came out. Takes a little while to boot up, particularly from a floppy drive, so in the interest of time I'll shorten this using video editing. So the end result is this, and you can see a couple of icons there representing the disk we've got in the drive, which is the Workbench 1.3 disk, and there's a RAM disk up there as well. So you can see it's got a very Mac-like interface, very similar to the graphical user interfaces that we all know so well now, but of course this was quite new back in the day. So you can open up these windows, and underneath you see these drawers, which are essentially folders, and you open them up, and inside them you've got icons representing various programs. Most of the usual suspects are here, so we've got a notepad, we've got a clock, calculator. Here's one that I'll show you. This is a little program that gets the Amiga to speak. So let's type some text in. Now with these shots showing me at the keyboard, you might hear quite a bit of white noise, and that's actually heavy rain. These external shots were taken at a different time to the ones that are looking straight at the screen, so occasionally you'll hear that white noise, which is rain pelting on the roof. So here we go.
I am the Amiga 500. I hope you will enjoy my features.
There we are. So if you want your Amiga to sound like Stephen Hawkins, that's the way to do it. Just appreciate that was a pretty amazing thing to hear coming from a computer at the time. So let's shut down the utilities and we'll look at the shell program. Now one interesting thing about Amiga DOS is that it has a command line interface, and here it is here. And it's enormously powerful. There's a huge range of commands, and if you're a programmer and a developer, you could do a number of amazing things using this command line interface. Now I'm just doing a couple of very simple things here, essentially having a look at two versions of the directory. You can see the folders, cabinets, and the files listed there. So this sets the Amiga apart from something like the Apple Macintosh, which didn't have a command line interface. So what I want to do now is to have a look at one or two of the extra programs that came with the Amiga. So I've just put an extra I've just put another disk into the machine in that external disk drive, and we're looking at what's on that. And you can see one of the things there is Amiga Basic. So this comes with the machine. It's on disk. It's a very powerful version of Basic. This is a little simple basic program I've written called Matrix. It does what you'd expect a matrix type program to do, and that is simply put some ASCII columns on the screen. And there you can see them. I'll just try and enlarge that window, but I can't. So you can see them running there in the window, which is for outputting results of your basic program. But let me just stop this program and I'll break into the basic editor, and you can see that there's a couple of screens there. It's a split screen, and on one side you've got your basic code, and on the other side you've got your output, so you can see exactly what you're getting when you're programming. A little bit like the QBasic screen in some ways. Other tools include things that help you transfer files from your Amiga disk to a PC environment. Pretty important in 1987 that computers had these sorts of things. There are quite a few other utilities available, but I don't want this video to go on too long, so we'll call it quits there. Before we finish though, I'll point out that the system does load up a RAM disk. This is quite a small disk that can be used, virtual disk rather, that can be used for a variety of things, and you'll notice at the top here there's a number of menus that allow you to do various things with disks and windows. There are a number of free Amiga emulators you can get on the net, so if you want to have a good play around with Amiga DOS, grab hold of one of those and give it a spin. Now, of course, being a home computer with very good sound and very good graphics, the Amiga 500 was mostly used for games, and it could handle that task extremely well. And here's one of my favourite games. I didn't play this on an Amiga, I played this on a multimedia PC in the early 90s, but I got quite addicted to it. It's called Lemmings, and the Amiga 500 handles it very well. And the idea is that you have these lemmings pouring out of this entrance. They all follow one another, and of course they can follow one another to their doom very easily. There's a number of obstacles you've got to get across, and you've got to herd your lemmings over those obstacles. And the way that you do that is that you can change them. You can give your lemmings various specialities. For example, we've got one lemming here that is blocking the rest of the lemmings. Well, we've got our bridge builder lemming building a bridge so they can get over it. Once he's built the bridge, I can dispatch with the blocking lemming, and the rest can stream across it. So down the bottom there you can choose all sorts of specialities for your lemmings. You've got blockers. This one here, for example, we're going to make him a blocker, otherwise the lemmings are going to stream back and fall down that hole. And we also need somebody to dig through this rock, so we're going to have a sort of, not a digger lemming, but one that pounds his way through that rock. The rock's going to defy physics and just hang there as the rest of the lemmings pour under it, but it's a game, and that's what happens in a computer game sometimes. So you can make your lemmings climbers, you can make them parachutists, you can make them diggers, which dig more or less straight down or at an angle. Usually at the beginning of the game you're given a percentage of lemmings that you've got to get to the exit, because you'll undoubtedly need to sacrifice a few of the lemmings, because as you turn them into these specialists, sometimes you can't get them back, so you've got to leave them there or just blow them up. So it'll give you a percentage at the beginning and say something like you need to save 90% of your lemmings, which means you're going to have to sacrifice a few of them. So for example, we're going to have to sacrifice this blocker here, so we'll blow them up, and that'll get rid of them. But we're going to rescue most of the lemmings. Now this is level 1, so it's the very simplest level, but it can be a very, very challenging game as you have all sorts of obstacles. Of course the lemmings are coming at you, you've got limited time to make decisions. It can be a lot of fun. So you can see there I rescued more lemmings than I had to, so I'm happy about that. Here's another game, and this is, when you read through the literature, looking at the Amiga, this is one of the top rated games on an Amiga. This is The Secret of Monkey Island, which is a graphical adventure game. I haven't played this before, and it was a game that I downloaded, put on a disc in order to show you for this video, simply because it's a very highly rated game. And I must admit, once I started to play it, I started to realise why. It's quite engaging. So, a lot like those Sierra games, although this one's made by Lucasfilms. You've got your character there, and he wanders around various environments, and you can move him around to get him to do things simply with the mouse. So, unlike the old adventure games where you had to type something in, you can now just select a command and your character will follow it. But you notice the music is quite stunning. Back there in that introductory sequence, the music was very full, it was very rich, and this is really something the Amiga could do extremely well. So we're now in our Pirates Bar, and we've got some more music, so you can see them having a lot of fun there. In the Pirates Bar we can talk to people, so we'll rock up to this particular pirate, ask him a few questions. And again, this will show you the quality of the Amiga graphics as soon as it loads the image off the disc, but there we go. So it was a big step up from the sort of adventure games that you got on earlier 8-bit computers. Well, there was a lot more software I would have liked to have shown you, but I didn't. In the interest of time, I had to edit a lot of it out just to get the video down to a reasonable size. So now we're onto the manuals, and this is the user manual, one that you get with the Amiga 500, and it's a very good manual indeed. It shows you everything that you need to know about the machine. It's easy to understand. It's got a really good technical section at the end, so there are good appendices with a lot of good information, quite deep information, circuit diagrams, how the chips work. It's got a section on what you might want to plug into your Amiga, and how to use the Windows and generally run the various bits and pieces of included software in Amiga DOS, including a section on the command line interface. So a really good manual for the owner of an Amiga 500. Now the second manual I've got is a lot more technical. This also came with the machine. This is all about Amiga DOS version 1.3, or Workbench 1.3 as it's called. But this is a very technical document, so this book is more for developers, and it goes it goes into a lot of depth as far as the command line interface is concerned. So there are just heaps and heaps of commands in this book, various ways you might do scripting, things you can do at quite a low level. So that's a useful book if you're that way inclined. And then there's the final book. This is Amiga Basic. Again, a very good manual. It goes through all the things that Amiga Basic can do, how it works, and of course all the commands that are available for that particular programming language. Quite a thick book, as you can see. It'll take a while to get through it all, but very good reference and source and tutorial for the basic language. So how do I summarize the Amiga 500? I learned quite a bit about it just preparing for this video, and I have to say that I'm impressed. There are deficiencies. For example, the keyboard is very mushy. Things are slow reading off the floppy disk, but hey, it's a budget home computer, and it was very cheap. You still got way more than you would have got from an 8-bit home computer just a year or so before. And when you consider that the chipset is virtually the same as the original Amiga, the Amiga 1000, that was released 1.5 years before this model, it's even more impressive. Commercially, the Amiga 500 was a great success in Europe, and here in New Zealand and Australia. Not so much a success in the US and Canada, and I'm not really sure why. What about business models like the 2000 and later ones? Well, they didn't dent the PC and PC-compatible market despite their technological superiority and low pricing. Now, some folks say that was bad marketing by Commodore, and there might be some truth in that, but I think the PC platform was just too entrenched at that stage. If I was to target a market I think the Amiga could have wiped the floor with, it was the one that the Apple Macintosh occupied. Desktop publishing, graphic design work and education. In other words, creative computing. The Amigas were colour and they were priced competitively. That it didn't knock Apple off that perch could have been largely due to marketing. Good marketing by Apple and poor marketing by Commodore. Apple's easy interfacing with laser printers and its relationship with creative software heavyweights such as Adobe probably also helped the Macintosh hold on to that niche. In the end, Amigas in the 1990s did find a niche in desktop video editing where they excelled. So it was a great line of computers and certainly historically significant enough to be called classics. Well, I hope you enjoyed that look at the world of Amigas and the Amiga 500 in particular. Well, that's it for this time. So until next time, keep well, and we'll see you in the next video.